Hey guys, tonight we are going to trace the footsteps of a man who has been called the wealthiest human to ever walk the earth, yet whose story drifts quietly at the edges of popular memory. Imagine the dry Sahel wind brushing against your skin as you trudge along narrow paths between scrubby trees, the horizon shimmering with heat. You hear the occasional donkey bray, and you wonder what life must have been like centuries ago in West Africa, long before skyscrapers and smartphones, when kingdoms grew from riverbanks and trade routes stitched whole continents together. It's the sort of place where one careless step might lead you into a patch of thorn bushes. And no, you probably won't survive this with modern sneakers. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how global this little community has become. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start in the open Sahel, that belt of land sandwiched between the lush forests farther south and the harsh desert farther north. The ground crunches under your sandals, pale with dry grasses, dotted by acacia trees whose branches look like they're stretching desperately for shade. This is the backdrop where the empire of Mali takes root, a place that seems deceptively quiet but hums with hidden potential. Caravans already snake across the Sahara, camels swaying as if tipsy, hauling salt, ivory, and most precious of all, gold. That gold lies deep in the soil of the Niger River Valley, and you imagine villagers panning glittering dust from muddy banks, probably more worried about mosquitoes than world economics. Historians still argue whether Mali's early wealth came more from direct mining or from clever taxation of passing merchants. But either way, the region begins glowing on medieval maps. You smell wood smoke from cooking fires in scattered villages. Families sit around clay pots of millet porridge, chatting in languages that twist and tumble like songs. Storytellers wander from settlement to settlement, drumming out rhythms and weaving tales of ancestors who talked with animals. The world feels simple, yet every trade path carries whispers of change. An empire is sprouting, though no one here yet knows its full weight. To the north, the Sahara is an endless sheet of shimmering danger, yet it's also a highway. Traders march with stoic patience, occasionally pausing to swat flies that refuse to respect personal space. You overhear a caravan leader muttering about taxes, always taxes, and realize that the flow of commerce is already being shaped by ambitious rulers. Salt from the desert meets cola nuts from the forests. Somewhere in the middle, wealth collects like dew. It's the early 14th century, though no villager scratches this on a wall calendar. Time is measured by the rains, the relief when storms finally crack open, soaking the ground, and the long sigh when the dry season stretches too far. Children chase each other with sticks, goats bleat at night, and the stars shine so bright they almost feel like nosy neighbors. And somewhere, tucked amid these rhythms, a child named Musa will grow. But right now, you're still lingering in the wider landscape, listening to griots sing epics of earlier kings, tapping their fingers on a lute-like instrument called the ngoni. You feel lulled by the repetition, half asleep, yet the story keeps moving. Quirky tidbit? Locals sometimes smear crocodile dung mixed with herbs as an early sunscreen. Not exactly SPF 50, but it shows how necessity sparks odd solutions. You imagine yourself reluctantly dabbing a little on your nose, then quickly regretting it when the smell follows you for hours. As you walk, you realize that this land, though quiet, hums with crossroads energy. Camels plod by with tinkling bells. Traders adjust their turbans against the sun. Villagers glance up from pounding grain in wooden mortars, watching strangers pass. Everyone here feels the pull of movement, of possibility. And beneath it all lies gold, shimmering unseen under river mud and rocky hillsides, waiting for a prince to turn it into legend. You shift your gaze from the wide Sahel horizon to a smaller, more intimate scene. The childhood of the boy who would become Mansa Musa. Imagine yourself crouched at the edge of a riverbank, toes sinking into cool mud as children splash in the shallows. Among them is Musa, still just another boy in a royal household, though destined for a life that will be anything but ordinary. The Niger River snakes lazily nearby, its waters glinting in sunlight, and you can almost hear the croaking of frogs blending with the laughter of kids skipping stones. Musa grows up in the courtly environment of Mali, surrounded by the chatter of elders, the stern presence of advisors, and the musical hum of griots. You can picture him listening, wide-eyed, as one griot tells of great ancestors who founded dynasties with little more than courage and a good supply of spears. The boy shifts in the sand, trying not to yawn too obviously, because even then, stories are long. Still, these tales shape him, planting seeds of destiny. The mainstream fact here, Musa was born around 1280, though the exact year remains fuzzy. Historians still argue whether it was slightly earlier or later, since precise records weren't exactly pinned on bulletin boards. But what they do agree on is that Musa grew up in the royal line, part of the Keita dynasty, a family that claimed descent from a heroic figure named Sundiata Keita, founder of the Mali Empire. To grow up under that lineage was like living under a shadow so large you couldn't see where it ended. As a child, Musa's days balance between structured education and moments of play. He learns to recite verses of the Quran, his small voice carefully following the low melodic tones of an imam. The courtyard smells faintly of parchment and ink, as scribes bend over their work, scratching lines of Arabic script onto rough pages. Musa peers over their shoulders, curious about the swirling letters, though the ink stains make it clear that neat handwriting is not his strength. In quieter moments, he escapes to the riverbanks, watching fishermen haul in nets heavy with tilapia and catfish. One quirky tidbit you discover. In local tradition, fish bladders were sometimes dried and used as floats, or even as strange little musical rattles. Musa, like any child, probably giggled at the odd noises, only to be scolded by a stern aunt reminding him not to waste food. The court itself is bustling with extended family, cousins, half-siblings, and attendants. You stroll the corridors and overhear endless discussions about alliances, marriages, and trade caravans. To a child, it must feel both dizzying and dull, like trying to pay attention to adult conversations that drone on about grain prices. Musa absorbs it nonetheless, the way you absorb the hum of a refrigerator even when you're not listening. One evening, as you lounge under a tree, Musa sneaks out to hear traveling storytellers by a fire. They sing of distant deserts and coastal lands where the air smells of salt and fish. He stares at the sparks rising into the night, his imagination lifting with them. Those sparks will one day fuel his drive to send his empire stretching far beyond anything his ancestors dreamed. but right now, he's just a boy trying to stay awake past bedtime. The environment around him leaves an impression, too. Rainy seasons turn the Sahel into a patchwork of puddles and lush grasses. Dry seasons make the ground crack like broken pottery. Musa learns resilience by simply existing here. The patience to wait for rain, the caution to conserve when water is scarce. His daily world is one where scarcity and abundance swing back and forth like a seesaw, teaching lessons no tutor could replicate. Historians still argue whether Musa's early life was particularly privileged compared to other royal youths, or whether his household was simply one of many competing branches of the dynasty. What seems certain is that, unlike the majority of children his age, Musa was groomed for leadership in subtle ways, taught not just to memorize verses, but also to understand the value of order, ritual, and reputation. As you walk away from the riverbank, the night deepens. You hear crickets begin their endless serenade. Musa is ushered back indoors, wrapped in warm cloths, told to sleep early. Yet you can sense his mind buzzing with the stories he has heard, the whispers of destiny in the voices of elders, the shimmer of river water that always seems to hide more than it reveals. And you, too, are left with that quiet hum, that this child, once so ordinary, will one day weigh down the economies of entire cities with his generosity. For now, though, he drifts off, another sleepy boy beneath the stars of Mali. You're back in the bustle of a royal courtyard, where the air buzzes with more gossip than the world's busiest group chat. This is the Mali of Musa's youth, a dynasty thick with cousins, uncles, half-siblings, and political rivals, who all share blood ties but very little patience with one another. You wander through shaded corridors where the smell of spiced stews mingles with sweat, parchment, and the faint metallic tang of polished spearheads. Everyone here seems to be watching everyone else, as though even the serving boys carry rumors along with their trays. The mainstream fact is straightforward. The Keita dynasty, founded by the legendary Sundiata Keita in the 13th century, controlled Mali through a delicate balance of hereditary claims and pragmatic muscle. Kings rose not just because of lineage, but also because they could keep both the nobles and the military satisfied. Musa, growing up in this environment, must have felt the constant thrum of tension, like a drumbeat under every meal. You picture him at a feast, nibbling cautiously on rice and roasted lamb, while his older cousins debate loudly about a tribute owed from neighboring provinces. The griots recite long lists of ancestral victories, and everyone politely pretends they aren't also calculating how to grab more power for themselves. Historians still argue whether the Keita succession process was orderly, passing cleanly from one designated heir to another, or whether it was more like a messy tug-of-war disguised in ceremony. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Official rituals on the surface, quiet bribes, and daggers in the shadows. One quirky tidbit: court attendants sometimes kept pet monkeys that were trained to steal food from inattentive nobles. Imagine sitting at a banquet and suddenly realizing your honeyed dates have been swiped by a smug little primate, while everyone else laughs politely. For Musa, these court antics would have been both entertainment and a reminder. In this palace, even the animals were schemers. The politics stretch beyond the palace walls, too. Vassal rulers from far-off towns arrive, bringing gifts of salt, woven cloth, or ivory. They bow deeply, but their eyes flicker, gauging whether this branch of the dynasty will hold firm or crumble. Musa listens quietly as his elders remind them of loyalty owed to the capital. He is learning, by osmosis, that an empire is less about brute force and more about keeping the chessboard balanced. At night, the palace quiets, though not completely. You hear footsteps echoing on stone, whispers behind doors, the scratch of scribes recording tallies of tribute. Musa lies awake, staring at the ceiling, absorbing the reality that his family is both his anchor and his battlefield. You might think he'd prefer to be out chasing fireflies, but no. His childhood is steeped in the lessons of intrigue. The broader dynasty itself is sprawling. There are factions tied to specific regions, others aligned with religious leaders, still others simply jockeying for a bigger slice of the gold trade. Musa's own branch has influence, yes, but also its enemies. You can imagine him keeping his head down, practicing a skill that will later define him: patience. He is not the loud cousin banging his goblet on the table. He is the quiet one, storing every look and word in memory, waiting for the right moment. As you wander past the palace gates, you catch the scent of the city beyond. Markets buzzing with traders hawking salt, cloth dyed in rich indigo, cola nuts that taste both bitter and stimulating. This economic hum underwrites all the palace posturing. Without the flow of goods, the gold, and the caravans, the dynastic drama would shrivel. Musa notices this too. Power is not just about who sits on the throne, but who controls the trade routes. And so, within this swirling stew of family drama, Musa begins to take shape. He learns when to speak, when to hold silence, and when to smile at jokes he doesn't find funny. He understands that the throne is less a seat of honor than a precarious perch, balanced on shifting alliances. By the time you leave the courtyard, the moon hangs low, casting silver light on the palace walls. Inside, arguments will continue. Cousins will plot. Advisors will whisper. Musa will lie quietly, absorbing it all, as though preparing himself for a future he cannot yet imagine. A future where all this intrigue will matter far less than the vastness of the empire he is destined to command. You find yourself seated on a reed mat in a shaded courtyard, the smell of ink and parchment hanging faintly in the air. Musa, no longer a child chasing riverbank games, now sits with other royal youths reciting verses of the Quran. His small lips shape the syllables carefully, his voice following the rhythmic cadence of the teacher who sways as he chants. You lean back and let the sound wash over you. Slow, melodic, hypnotic, like waves folding on a beach. The mainstream fact here is that Islam had reached Mali centuries earlier, through trade across the Sahara. By Musa's time, the religion wasn't just a private devotion. It was a powerful cultural and political glue. Learning Arabic, studying the Quran, and praying 5 times a day marked one as civilized and sophisticated in the courtly sense. Musa, like other elite boys, absorbed this early, as much a part of his education as learning the rules of inheritance or the geography of trade routes. You picture him fidgeting as a scribe scratches letters onto parchment, the reed pen squeaking faintly. Arabic script curls across the page like elegant vines. Musa tilts his head, fascinated and frustrated all at once, like any student staring at homework that refuses to make sense. Historians still argue whether Musa himself became fully literate in Arabic or relied mostly on scholars around him. But either way, the exposure shaped his worldview. It connected him to a vast spiritual and intellectual network stretching from Cairo to Mecca. One quirky tidbit: In some schools, children used wooden tablets coated with a thin wash of clay to practice writing. After reciting lessons, they would wash the clay off, literally wiping away mistakes, and start fresh. You imagine little Musa sighing dramatically, scrubbing his tablet clean, muttering something equivalent to, ugh, again, while his teacher insists repetition builds memory. Beyond formal education, Musa learns etiquette. You watch him practicing bows, greetings, and the art of listening more than speaking. Court tutors remind him that respect for elders is not optional. It is survival. He learns to kneel in prayer at dawn, to wash his hands and face before meals, to avoid spilling food on his robe, though he probably fails at that last one more than once. The courtyard also serves as a gathering place for scholars visiting from North Africa. Imagine Musa sneaking glances at these learned men with their flowing robes, turbans neatly wound, voices filled with confident recitations of distant lands. They describe Cairo, bustling with markets and scholars. They speak of Mecca, shimmering like a beacon at the heart of Islam. Musa's eyes widen. His world suddenly feels larger than the Niger River, larger than Mali itself. The balance between Islam and local tradition is delicate. At night, you hear griots singing epic tales with references to spirits and ancestors. During the day, imams stress the oneness of God. Musa grows up in this blend, where both strands shape daily life. He learns not to mock the older traditions, but he feels drawn toward the order and prestige that Islamic learning provides. This dual inheritance will later allow him to promote Islam while respecting the cultural roots of his people. Imagine strolling through the palace library, a modest room compared to what will one day exist in Timbuktu, where texts are stacked in neat bundles. The air smells of parchment, dust, and oil lamps. Musa runs a finger across the bindings, daydreaming of a future where such books might line entire city streets. He doesn't know it yet, but his name will be forever linked to that vision. Even outside the palace, the influence of Islamic education filters into daily routines. Merchants mutter prayers before starting journeys. Farmers discuss lunar calendars to plan planting. Children sing verses as part of their play. Musa breathes this in as naturally as air. By the time dusk falls, the boy who once giggled at fish bladders on the riverbank now sits with grave concentration, mouthing words that connect him to a faith spanning continents. His eyes grow heavy, but the rhythm of study, prayer, and ritual has carved grooves in his life, grooves that will deepen as he steps closer to power. And so, in this courtyard filled with ink-stained fingers and chanting voices, Musa's identity is shaped, not only as a prince of Mali, but as a Muslim leader whose future will glitter with gold and reverberate with devotion. You drift into the palace halls again, where the air feels heavy with secrets. Torches flicker along stone walls, casting long shadows that seem to stretch like listening ears. Here is where Musa grows into adolescence, no longer just a boy repeating lessons, but a quiet observer in a court where power is as slippery as wet clay. You walk beside him, noting how he keeps his voice soft, his head slightly bowed, careful not to give rivals an excuse to single him out. The mainstream fact: like many great courts of the medieval world, Mali's palace was as much a theater of politics as it was a residence. Cousins, nobles, generals, and scholars circled one another in a careful dance, each seeking advantage. Musa's own place in this hierarchy was far from guaranteed. He was in the royal family, yes, but so were many others, each with their own ambitions. In a court this crowded, survival meant listening closely, speaking carefully, and aligning yourself with the right patrons. Picture Musa at a banquet. The food is plentiful. Bowls of rice mixed with spices, roasted lamb so tender it slides from the bone, honey cakes sticky enough to glue your fingers together. But around the edges of the meal, the real feast is gossip. You hear whispers. This noble favors that cousin. This marriage alliance could tip the scales. This governor is late with his tribute. Musa listens, pretending to fuss with his cup, but you can sense he's storing every word. One quirky tidbit. Nobles sometimes hired griots to craft playful, slightly mocking songs about rivals. Imagine sitting at dinner while a bard casually strums a tune about your tendency to sweat under pressure. Everyone laughing politely while you force a smile. Musa would have learned quickly that humor could be as sharp as a dagger in these halls. Historians still argue whether Musa's rise later was the result of deliberate maneuvering during these youthful years, or simply a twist of fate when the throne unexpectedly opened. But they agree on this. His calm, observant nature gave him an edge. While others blustered and boasted, Musa played the long game. You trail him down a corridor after one such feast. He passes guards whose spears gleam under torchlight. Behind closed doors, you hear muffled voices, council meetings that stretch late into the night. Musa doesn't enter, not yet, but he notices who goes in, who comes out smiling, and who doesn't emerge at all. It's an education in silence, in patience, in the subtle language of shifting alliances. Beyond politics, daily palace life carries small comforts and irritations. Musa wakes to the crow of roosters and the smell of millet porridge bubbling in clay pots. He practices reciting prayers, sometimes sneezing when incense smoke wafts into his face. He endures lectures on governance from elder advisors who seem determined to talk until even the walls look bored. And through it all, he learns to keep a straight face, even when a monkey servant steals a fig off his plate. The atmosphere grows tenser as he ages. The older generation debates succession constantly, voices rising, hands slamming onto low wooden tables. Musa watches from the sidelines, not yet a player, but already marked by lineage. He senses that one day he will be dragged into the spotlight whether he wants it or not. Step outside for a moment and you see the wider world pressing in. Caravans bring news of rebellions, of droughts, of rival kingdoms stirring in the forests and deserts. The empire is strong, but its strength requires constant vigilance. Every whisper in the palace links back to these broader threats. Musa knows that to survive here, he must prepare for more than courtly games. He must be ready to rule. And so, in these flickering corridors, filled with cautious laughter and hidden knives, Musa is shaped. His childhood innocence fades, replaced by watchfulness. He is not yet king, not yet the legendary Mansa Musa whose generosity will ripple across continents. For now, he is simply a young prince keeping his head down, listening harder than anyone else, and learning the subtle art of patience in a court that devours the careless. You step outside into the dry air of the Sahel again, only to realize the palace walls behind you are buzzing with the news of a grand decision. The reigning king, Abu Bakr II, has announced something astonishing. He intends to sail westward across the Atlantic, chasing the horizon in search of lands no one has mapped. You blink, because this is not the sort of thing kings usually do. They tend to sit tight on their thrones, collect taxes, and occasionally yell at rebellious governors. But Abu Bakr II, he's more of an adventurer, and so he leaves behind a deputy to mind the empire while he follows his watery dream. That deputy, of course, is young Musa. The mainstream fact is that Abu Bakr II's voyage is one of history's mysteries. Accounts from Arab chroniclers tell us he sailed with hundreds of ships, provisions stocked, determined to discover what lay beyond the Atlantic waves. Historians still argue whether this was an elaborate myth or a real expedition that possibly reached as far as the Americas. Whatever the truth, the effect on Musa's life was immediate. Suddenly, he held the keys to Mali's empire, even if only as regent. Imagine the scene. Courtiers scramble in confusion, half admiring the king's boldness, half horrified at being abandoned. Governors wring their hands about tribute schedules, merchants worry about caravan safety, and generals mutter about keeping soldiers disciplined without the king's stern presence. And, in the middle of it all, Musa sits calmly, adjusting his robes, pretending he isn't terrified. One quirky tidbit: sailors preparing for Abu Bakr II's journey are said to have brought live chickens on board, both as food and as alarm clocks. You picture a deck full of squawking birds, pecking at grain while confused sailors try to look brave. Musa, left on shore, probably found the whole spectacle both impressive and absurd. Back in the palace, Musa begins acting as regent. He listens to petitions from village chiefs, approves the dispatch of trade caravans, and settles disputes over grazing land. His early education in patience and observation suddenly pays off. He doesn't try to dazzle anyone with big reforms yet. Instead, he quietly keeps the machine running, making sure gold continues to flow from the mines, salt continues to cross the desert, and prayers continue to rise from the mosques. You stroll with him into the audience chamber. The hall smells faintly of incense, the air warm with body heat from a crowd of petitioners. A merchant bows, complaining that rival traders are undercutting him with inferior salt. Musa nods gravely, though his eyes flicker with amusement. Another petitioner insists that a village's cows are being cursed by jealous neighbors. Musa manages to keep a straight face, though you can almost hear him thinking, "I did not sign up for livestock drama." But beneath these small matters lies a heavier weight. Musa knows he is temporary, at least in theory. Abu Bakr II could return any year, any month, any day, appearing suddenly at the port with tales of new worlds. Until then, Musa balances the empire carefully, cautious not to overstep. Historians still argue whether Musa anticipated the king would never return, or whether he truly believed his role was only interim. What is clear is that when Abu Bakr II's ships vanished into the blue horizon, they vanished for good. Days turned into months, months into years, and no sails ever appeared again. Musa, the patient deputy, gradually ceased to be temporary. This moment, though strange and uncertain, became the pivot of his life. Without Abu Bakr's daring voyage, Musa might never have risen to the throne. But with the king gone, the regent's chair hardened into a throne, and the quiet prince found himself no longer just a caretaker. He was about to become Mansa Musa. The palace settles into this new reality slowly, like a family adjusting to a missing relative who never comes home. Musa rises each morning, dons his robes, and steps into chambers that feel increasingly his own. He still prays humbly at dawn, still listens more than he speaks, but you can sense his confidence growing. You look out over the city with him at sunset. Smoke curls from cooking fires. The Niger River glows on copper under the fading sun, and the sounds of laughter, bargaining, and drumming drift up from the streets. For a moment, Musa breathes deeply, steadying himself. He is no longer the boy on the riverbank. He is the regent of an empire, standing on the edge of a destiny shaped as much by absence as by ambition. The throne room feels heavier now, as though the air itself realizes what has happened. Abu Bakr II is gone, swallowed by the ocean and silence. Days have become months, months have blurred into years, and no sails return to the western horizon. Whispers ripple through the palace. The king will not come back. Ministers glance at Musa more often, governors begin addressing him with deeper bows, and the people in the markets quietly shift their language from the deputy to the ruler. The mainstream fact is that around 1312, Musa formally ascended as Mansa, the title for emperor. What began as a temporary regency hardened into permanent rule. This wasn't a dramatic coup with swords drawn at midnight. It was more like a slow tide rising, until one day you look down and realize your sandals are wet. Musa, patient and observant, accepts the mantle. You walk with him through the palace as attendants arrange ceremonies of accession. Drummers pound steady rhythms that seem to echo the heartbeat of the empire. Griots gather in circles, chanting genealogies that trace Musa back to the heroic Sundiata Keita, as though to remind everyone that legitimacy flows in his veins. Musa bows, prays, and listens, his calm face hiding the storm of nerves inside. One quirky tidbit. Coronation rituals sometimes included sprinkling dust or even ash onto the new ruler's head, symbolizing humility. Imagine standing there in regal robes, gold bangles gleaming, only for someone to gently pat you with a handful of dirt. Musa accepts it without complaint, perhaps with the faintest inward smirk, because, after all, what's a little dust compared to the Sahara? Historians still argue whether Musa's claim to the throne was universally welcomed, or whether rival branches of the dynasty grumbled in private. Some suggest his rise was eased by the sheer oddity of Abu Bakr II's disappearance. Few dared question a man who stepped into the void when the king literally sailed off the map. Others think Musa had quietly cultivated allies during his regency, smoothing his transition into power. Whatever the balance, he emerged not as the boyish caretaker but as Mansa Musa, ruler of Mali. Step outside with him on his first walk as official emperor. The city hums with energy. Market stalls overflow with salt slabs, ivory tusks, and bolts of indigo cloth. Merchants bow low, murmuring blessings, though you can sense the flicker of calculation in their eyes. What kind of ruler will this man be? Musa's reply is subtle. He stops at a mosque, kneels in prayer, and lets the people see him grounded in piety. It's a statement without speeches. Faith will guide his reign. In the palace, advisors hover, eager to test his authority. One recommends heavier taxes on caravans, another pushes for military campaigns, yet another insists on grand feasts to show wealth. Musa listens, nods, and responds only after long pauses, the kind that make people shift uncomfortably on their mats. He knows the power of silence. It makes others reveal their impatience. At night, Musa retreats to his chambers. You sit nearby as he stares at a flickering oil lamp, the light casting sharp lines on his face. He whispers prayers, not for gold or glory, but for wisdom. He understands that wealth without order crumbles, and power without humility burns out. And yet, he's human. You catch him chuckling one evening as a servant accidentally spills a tray of dates and then slips on them like a scene from an early comedy sketch. The laughter echoes through the chamber, a reminder that even emperors appreciate slapstick. As the weeks roll into months, the empire adjusts. Caravans continue to move. Farmers still plant millet. Griots craft new songs, adding Musa's name to the long chain of rulers. But this new Mansa is different. Calmer than some, more devout than others, with a vision quietly forming. You sense it as you stand with him at the edge of the Niger River. The water slides by, indifferent to human crowns, yet Musa gazes into it as if seeing maps, mosques, and markets unfurl in its ripples. The boy who once sat quietly at the edges of feasts is gone. In his place stands the man who will make Mali shimmer across the medieval world. A ruler whose generosity will bewilder Cairo, dazzle Mecca, and echo through history. You wake with the empire as the roosters crow and the first smoke of cooking fires curls into the morning air. The throne is now Musa's, and he sits with the calm of someone who knows power can slip through your fingers like river sand if you grip it too tightly. He doesn't rush into conquest or wild spending sprees. Instead, he begins with the steady work of reforms, small adjustments that ripple outward like stones tossed into a pond. The mainstream fact is that Musa reshaped Mali's administration early in his reign. He organized provincial governors, tightened oversight of taxes, and ensured tribute flowed smoothly from distant towns back to the capital. Trade was the empire's lifeblood, and Musa knew the arteries had to stay unclogged. His reputation as a competent, devout ruler began not with flashy wars, but with bureaucratic patience. Historians still argue whether these changes were sweeping innovations or refinements of systems already in place under earlier rulers. But all agree that Musa's hand steadied Mali at a crucial moment. Picture him in the marketplace. Dust rises underfoot as merchants spread out mats of goods, slabs of desert salt that sparkle like crystals, ivory carved into delicate shapes, cloth dyed so deep blue it almost glows, and little pouches of pepper that tickle your nose. Musa walks through, attendants trailing behind, nodding at traders. He isn't just sightseeing. He's signaling that he cares about commerce. By showing his face, he reassures merchants that the empire is secure, that their journeys across treacherous deserts will be worth the risk. One quirky tidbit: some merchants used ostrich eggshells, carefully hollowed and decorated as containers for perfumes or spices. Imagine fumbling one of those fragile treasures in the middle of a hot, crowded market. Oops, there goes a week's profit. Musa, thankfully, has steadier hands, though you can sense he enjoys the novelty. Taxes are another matter. Musa adjusts levies so that caravans pay fairly but not cripplingly, striking a balance between revenue and goodwill. Traders grumble, as traders always do, but they keep coming, and that is the true measure of success. You overhear one merchant muttering to another that at least Musa doesn't take bribes in goats, unlike some lesser kings along the routes. Inside the palace, Musa also reforms the court. He appoints trusted scribes, ensuring records are kept in Arabic, tying Mali more closely to the wider Islamic world. He encourages judges, or qadis, to settle disputes according to Islamic law, but he doesn't bulldoze local customs. Instead, he weaves the two systems together, letting people see both tradition and faith honored. It's like braiding two ropes, stronger when intertwined. Historians still argue how deeply Musa's reforms penetrated beyond the urban centers. Did villagers in remote forests feel his policies, or did they keep living as they always had, far from the hum of bureaucracy? The answer is probably both. The empire's heart was pulsing strongly, even if its fingertips sometimes wandered. You follow Musa as he inspects tribute brought in from provinces. Piles of gold dust glitter in clay jars, stacked alongside sacks of grain, dried fish, and woven mats. The wealth is staggering, yet Musa pays attention even to the humble goods. To him, empire is built not only on gold, but also on millet porridge that fills bellies and mats that cover sleeping floors. At dusk, he joins evening prayers. The muezzin's call drifts across the city, softening the bustle into stillness. Musa bows deeply, forehead touching the ground, robes pooling around him. It's a quiet reminder. Reforms, markets, taxes, all of it must rest on a foundation of devotion. Later, by lamplight, he reviews tallies with his scribes. Numbers blur, candles sputter, and his advisors yawn, but Musa persists. He knows that empires don't collapse overnight. They unravel slowly, thread by thread. His task is to keep the weave tight. As you step outside, the night hums with crickets and distant drumming. Merchants tuck their goods away. Families huddle in compounds, and the Niger glistens under the moon. Musa's reforms are subtle, not the stuff of flashy songs. Yet you feel the empire settling, like a house with new beams laid firmly in place. The stage is set for expansion, for glory, for a pilgrimage that will shake the medieval world. But for now, the work is quiet, methodical, and surprisingly soothing, like balancing the books before bed. The empire exhales as Musa's reforms settle into place, but Musa himself is already looking outward. You join him on a ride beyond the capital, the dry wind tugging at your cloak as horses kick up dust. His gaze stretches far across the horizon, toward lands not yet firmly bound to Mali's authority. Expansion is on his mind, and you feel it in the tense excitement of his entourage, the way soldiers polish their spears a little more carefully than usual. The mainstream fact is clear. Under Musa's reign, Mali expanded dramatically, securing control over important trade routes and cities. The empire grew to encompass vast swaths of West Africa, reaching toward the Atlantic coast in the west and deeper into the desert in the north. Historians still argue whether Musa himself personally led campaigns or delegated to generals, but either way, the map of Mali ballooned under his rule, covering some of the richest trade networks of the medieval world. You trudge beside the soldiers as they march. The sun burns overhead, the ground crunches under sandals, and the rhythm of drums keeps the column steady. Caravans of donkeys follow, laden with supplies, grain, water skins, even bundles of firewood strapped clumsily to their backs. The campaign is not all glamour. It's long, hot, and filled with the eternal problem of sand finding its way into everything you own. One quirky tidbit: when armies camped, musicians often played horns and drums not just for morale, but also to scare off wild animals at night. Imagine trying to fall asleep while your comrade insists on blowing a horn at intervals to keep the hyenas nervous. Musa, reclining under a canopy, probably chuckled at the racket while scribes scratched notes by lamplight. Expansion isn't only about battles. Much of it happens through diplomacy. Musa sending emissaries with gifts of cloth, salt, and gold dust to local rulers. Some submit eagerly, preferring to join the prosperous Mali fold rather than fight. Others resist, their fortresses perched stubbornly on rocky outcrops. Soldiers sigh, prepare ladders, and get to work. You overhear commanders arguing strategies, their voices sharp in the night air. Should they press further north, into the barren stretches where salt mines promise wealth? Or should they push west toward rivers and fertile fields? Historians still argue about the exact sequence of conquests, but they agree that Musa's reign brought an unprecedented consolidation of power. Mali became not just large but cohesive, tied together by trade, law, and Musa's deliberate authority. Back at the palace, maps are unrolled, though map in this era means rough sketches on parchment, more imagination than precision. Musa leans over them, tracing trade routes with his finger. Salt from the Sahara, gold from the south, fish from the Niger. Each line represents more than geography. It represents the veins of wealth feeding his empire. He smiles quietly, knowing he holds the arteries of medieval commerce in his hands. Meanwhile, life for ordinary villagers changes slowly. New governors arrive, demanding tribute, but also bringing the promise of Mali's protection. Markets expand, soldiers patrol, and griots sing of victories that might feel distant but still stir pride. You wander into one such village, where children chant Musa's name in a sing-song rhyme. Their parents shrug, amused, as they haul water from wells. Empire, to them, means fewer raids, more taxes, and the occasional parade of soldiers eating all the roasted yams. At night, Musa reflects. He kneels in prayer, whispering gratitude for victories, asking for guidance in times of doubt. He is not a reckless conqueror. He is a man who weighs expansion against stability, glory against responsibility. He knows empires can crack under their own size if not carefully held together. And so you watch Mali swell across the Sahel, its borders pushing outward like ink spreading on parchment. Musa rides at the center of it all, calm, deliberate, unhurried. His expansion is not a mad dash, but a steady drumbeat, the kind that lulls you into a rhythm before you realize how vast the empire has become. By the time the campaign season winds down, the soldiers return with dust in their hair. The donkeys look ready for retirement, and griots already compose songs celebrating victories. Musa listens, nods, and smiles faintly. He knows that the songs will outlast the blisters and boredom, and that's what truly matters. You wander with Musa along the banks of the Niger River, the water glinting under the late afternoon sun. Ahead, you see a settlement that looks ordinary enough at first. Mud brick houses clustered near the shoreline. Children chasing goats through narrow lanes. But Musa's eyes linger on this place with unusual intensity. This is Timbuktu, still young, still muddy and rough around the edges, but soon to bloom into one of the jewels of his empire. The mainstream fact: Timbuktu existed before Musa, founded around the 12th century as a small trading post. But it was under Musa's reign that the town began its transformation into a true center of scholarship and commerce. He drew scholars, architects, and traders here, investing in mosques and libraries that would make Timbuktu a beacon across the Islamic world. Historians still argue whether Musa immediately recognized its potential or whether its rise was a more gradual process. But his patronage unquestionably set it on its golden path. You step into the narrow streets, dust clings to your sandals, and the air smells faintly of fish from nearby riverboats. Traders lay out mats with their goods, salt in big slabs, shiny copper trinkets, leather bags dyed in deep reds. Musa strolls among them, and people bow low, their voices murmuring blessings. For them, the presence of the Mansa is like the sudden arrival of the sun in their marketplace. One quirky tidbit. In early Timbuktu, Some homes were built with flat roofs that doubled as sleeping platforms on hot nights. You imagine yourself climbing up to stretch out under the stars, only to be startled by a neighbor sneezing loudly on the next roof over. Musa, passing through, likely found these living arrangements both practical and amusing. Back in the town square, Musa calls for meetings with local leaders. He listens as traders speak of road repairs, as scholars ask for places to teach, as imams request larger spaces for Friday prayers. He nods thoughtfully, his gaze shifting to the horizon. What he sees is more than a dusty market town. He sees a crossroads of cultures, where desert caravans meet riverboats, and where ideas can flow as freely as gold. Historians still argue whether Musa himself laid the foundations of the legendary Sankore University, or whether his successors expanded it, but everyone agrees his reign marked the turning point. You can almost smell the future parchment of thousands of manuscripts, ink staining fingers, voices reciting law, poetry, and astronomy by the glow of oil lamps. For now, it is still a dream, but Musa is already imagining shelves of knowledge rising where only sand and clay huts stand today. You sit with him in the evening as he speaks quietly to architects. He gestures toward the mosque, insisting it be expanded, its mud walls reinforced, its minaret rising taller so travelers can see it from afar. His voice is calm, but there's a spark in his tone. The thrill of building something that will outlast even him. The townsfolk gather to watch construction begin. You hear the thud of wooden hammers, the scraping of clay being packed into molds, the shouts of workers hauling beams. Children peer around corners, their faces dusty, their eyes wide. Musa stands among them, his robes catching the golden light, looking not just like a king but like a man planting seeds in the soil of history. And yet, it isn't all lofty vision. As the sun sets, you notice Musa pause to taste a bowl of spiced fish stew offered by a local family. He eats quietly, smiles, and offers them a blessing. For all his grandeur, he knows that the empire thrives not only on monuments, but on the daily loyalty of people who simply want to feed their children and trade their goods. By nightfall, you find yourself on one of those flat rooftops, lying beside Musa as he gazes at the stars. The desert wind sighs across the town, carrying the scent of clay, smoke, and river water. He murmurs verses from the Quran, then falls silent, as if already lost in thoughts of the libraries, mosques, and markets that will soon make Timbuktu legendary. The air feels warmer today, shimmering with the scent of dust and sweat. But what truly glitters here is not the sun. It's the gold, everywhere, almost absurd in its abundance. You trail Musa as he walks into a treasury chamber where jars overflow with gold dust. Nuggets lie heaped like forgotten pebbles, and gilded ornaments sparkle even in the dim light of oil lamps. For a moment, you feel as though you've stumbled into a dragon's hoard. Except this hoard is real, and its guardian is a calm, prayerful emperor. The mainstream fact. Mali was one of the largest producers of gold in the medieval world. At its height, the empire controlled as much as half of the Old World's gold supply. This wealth flowed from mines in places like Bambouk and Bure, carried by traders through the Sahara to North Africa and beyond. Historians still argue over the exact figures. Did Mali produce 2/3 of the world's gold, or was that an exaggeration from awestruck chroniclers? Either way, it was staggering. Musa dips his fingers into a jar of dust, letting the grains spill through like glowing sand. He chuckles softly, as if amused by the idea that so much value can feel so slippery and insubstantial. You lean closer and sneeze. The dust tickles your nose, earning a polite but raised eyebrow from the emperor. One quirky tidbit. Gold dust was often measured with scales carried by merchants, but people also sometimes stored it in hollow bird bones, sealing the ends with wax. Imagine fishing one of those delicate containers from your pocket while bargaining, only to have it snap open and cover your robes in sparkling powder. Instant fashion statement, though a financially painful one. Musa understands that wealth is both blessing and burden. He must distribute it carefully, like water in a desert, enough to nourish, but not so much that it drowns. He watches caravans being loaded, sacks of gold dust balanced on camels, guards tightening their grips on spears. Trade routes stretch northward like veins carrying the lifeblood of the empire, and every grain of dust has the potential to make or break alliances. Back in the palace, griots sing of Musa's riches, their voices rising with exaggerated flair. Children clap and laugh, repeating rhymes about how the Mansa could pave streets with gold if he wanted. Musa smiles faintly, though he knows such songs are both a source of pride and a target for envy. He prefers to show restraint, even while acknowledging that the empire's wealth cannot be hidden. Historians still argue whether Musa's wealth was primarily a result of direct state control over the mines or from taxing the constant stream of caravans. Likely it was both. Miners panning rivers and digging shallow shafts, merchants groaning under the weight of tribute, and the empire's coffers swelling from every angle. You can almost hear the clinking of coins in faraway markets, where traders in Cairo or Fez speak Musa's name with equal parts awe and suspicion. At night, Musa kneels in prayer, surrounded by this glitter. He prays not for more, but for wisdom to use what he already holds. He knows that unchecked wealth can unbalance economies, warp loyalties, even tempt enemies to invade. He understands the paradox. The more gold you have, the more careful you must be. And yet, he's human. You catch him once at a small feast, idly balancing a nugget of gold on his spoon, pretending it's dessert before chuckling at his own private joke. His advisors groan, probably imagining the chronicles someday recording Musa ate gold pudding. Outside, the night is quiet, save for the distant strumming of a griot's lute. The Niger River flows softly, its waters carrying whispers of trade yet to come. Musa leans on the balcony, gold dust still faintly shimmering on his fingertips. In that glow, you see not just wealth, but responsibility. A ruler aware that his empire's future glitters as brightly and precariously as the treasure in his halls. Morning light filters through carved wooden shutters, casting striped patterns on the floor of Musa's palace. Today, you're not following armies or counting gold. You're sinking into the rhythm of palace life itself. It's quieter here, though still tinged with the hum of authority. The courtyards echo with chatter. The kitchens smoke with stews, and scribes bend over their work as if the empire depends on their ink not drying out. The mainstream fact is that the palace at Niani, believed to be Musa's capital, was more than a royal residence. It was an administrative hub where decisions affecting millions were made. Musa presided over councils, received envoys, and coordinated with governors spread across a territory so vast it took weeks to traverse. Yet, amid the politics, life unfolded with routines that any household might recognize. Meals, rituals, complaints about noisy neighbors. though here the neighbors might be whole provinces. Historians still argue about the exact location and layout of Musa's palace complex, since little archaeological evidence survives. But accounts from Arab visitors describe a court filled with order, ceremony, and no shortage of food. You sit cross-legged at a long mat where attendants lay out breakfast. Millet porridge drizzled with honey, bowls of dried figs, and roasted fish seasoned with pepper. Musa eats sparingly, never one to gorge, though he insists guests are fed generously. The air smells rich with spices, and you lick your lips as the porridge sticks slightly to the roof of your mouth. One quirky tidbit. Court musicians sometimes used hollow gourds with strings stretched across them. Early ancestors of the Kora. Their music floated through the palace, equal parts soothing and persistent. Imagine trying to take a nap while someone plucks cheerfully beside your bed, insisting they're practicing. Musa endures it patiently, nodding along, though you suspect he occasionally fantasizes about confiscating the instrument. After breakfast, scribes shuffle in with scrolls and wooden tablets. They read reports from distant provinces, salt caravans delayed by storms, disputes over grazing rights, merchants squabbling over tax rates. Musa listens, chin resting on his hand, occasionally raising an eyebrow at particularly dramatic complaints. One envoy insists that a rival governor bewitched his cattle. Musa politely refers the matter to judges, clearly stifling a sigh. The day moves in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Councils meet, decisions are made, and courtiers glide in and out, bowing deeply each time. You notice how Musa balances solemnity with accessibility. He never raises his voice unnecessarily. He lets silence do the heavy lifting. His calm demeanor is itself a performance, teaching everyone that panic has no place in these halls. By midday, the palace kitchens roar back to life. Huge pots simmer with rice, lamb, and beans. The smell drifts into the courtyard, mingling with the warm, dusty air. Musa hosts banquets not as frivolous indulgence but as tools of diplomacy. Guests are seated in careful order. Allies close, rivals farther down. Everyone fed enough to leave content but not so stuffed they can't walk home. You watch him smile faintly at a particularly over-eager noble who shovels food as though the empire might collapse before dessert. Historians still argue how much daily life in Musa's court resembled Arab or Berber customs, since Mali's traditions mixed Islamic practice with local culture. Was his palace protocol a faithful reflection of North African courts, or was it a uniquely Malian blend? Either way, the result was impressive enough to leave foreign visitors dazzled. Evening brings a shift in mood. Musicians gather in the courtyard, playing slow, soothing melodies, as griots recite stories of ancestors. Children chase each other until attendants shoo them inside. The smell of burning incense drifts through the corridors, mingling with the sharper tang of leather from soldiers polishing their gear. Musa sits quietly, his eyes half closed, listening not only to the stories, but to the cadence of continuity. The idea that he is just another verse in a song that will stretch long after him. And when night deepens, the palace dims. Attendants snuff lamps, leaving only the stars glittering above. You hear the faint rustle of fabric as Musa retreats to his chamber, where prayers end the day. The empire outside may be vast, wealthy, and restless, but here, inside these walls, the steady pulse of palace life continues. Meals, music, scribes, decisions, an endless rhythm that is oddly comforting, like a lullaby hummed on repeat. The palace grows still after the chatter of evening, but Musa himself rises before dawn, long before most of his attendants have rubbed the sleep from their eyes. You follow him through shadowed corridors into the courtyard, where the sky is only beginning to pale, and the stars still hang like tiny silver pins over the Sahel. The air is cool, carrying the scent of dust and damp earth from the Niger. This is Musa's sacred hour, the mainstream fact. Musa was deeply devoted to Islam. His reign was marked by efforts to promote the faith, from building mosques to supporting scholars, and his famous pilgrimage to Mecca was driven as much by piety as by politics. Devotion wasn't just a public performance for him. It shaped his daily rhythm, grounding his empire's glittering wealth in spiritual purpose. Historians still argue how much of his Islamic practice was personal fervor versus political strategy to align Mali with the wider Muslim world. The line between belief and politics blurs, but for Musa they walked hand in hand. You kneel with him on a woven mat, hearing the first adhan, the call to prayer, drifting softly across the city. His attendants unroll prayer rugs, and Musa bows low, forehead touching the mat, robes pooling around him. His whispered recitations are steady, practiced, filled with the quiet certainty of habit. You mimic the motion, feeling the ground cool beneath your brow. For a moment, the empire is silent, as if even the markets and caravans pause to breathe in rhythm with the emperor's devotion. One quirky tidbit. Travelers' accounts note that some rulers in West Africa kept portable prayer mats embroidered with gold thread, equal parts devotion and display. You imagine Musa being gifted such a mat and politely hiding a smile, thinking, "Surely God doesn't need embroidery to hear me." Still, he accepts with grace, storing it away for ceremonial occasions. After prayer, he strolls through the palace garden. The sky brightens into rose and gold, birds chattering in the acacia branches. Attendants hover, but Musa waves them off, preferring a few quiet moments. He fingers prayer beads, murmuring invocations, as dew clings to the grass. His mind, you sense, is not only on his own soul, but on the weight of ruling justly, as the Quran demands. Back in the council chamber later that day, Musa's piety continues to guide him. He listens to a dispute between merchants, one accusing the other of shorting him on salt. Instead of barking judgments, he calls in a qadi, an Islamic judge, and urges both men to swear truthfully. The decision is slow, deliberate, but it reassures the court. Law here is not arbitrary whim, but rooted in divine guidance. Historians still argue whether Musa's promotion of Islam was purely sincere or partly a tool to solidify Mali's connections with North Africa and the wider Islamic trade network. You watch him, and you suspect it was both. His prayers are genuine, but he is too shrewd not to realize that faith is also politics, that an empire seen as devout is an empire respected. At night, as the palace quiets again, Musa gathers scholars to read aloud passages from religious texts. Their voices echo in the lamplight, steady and sonorous. He nods along, occasionally asking questions, probing meanings, challenging interpretations. His piety is not passive. It is inquisitive, alive, always reaching. And once the lamps are snuffed, you hear him whisper a final prayer, almost like a lullaby. Gratitude for gold, for rain, for the loyalty of his people. His devotion is not heavy-handed, not a show meant to cow others. It is simply woven into his life, like thread through cloth, grounding the glitter of his empire in a rhythm older and steadier than kingship itself. The palace bustles with a strange new energy. It's not the rhythm of taxes being tallied or markets buzzing. It's the nervous shuffle of preparations on a scale no one here has ever seen. Musa has decided he will make the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, and the entire empire seems to pause, inhale, and then scramble like ants after someone kicks their hill. You follow him into the courtyards where camels kneel patiently, blinking as servants heap impossible loads onto their backs. The mainstream fact. In 1324, Mansa Musa set out on his legendary pilgrimage to Mecca, traveling across the Sahara with thousands of attendants, soldiers, and merchants, plus an eye-watering supply of gold. His journey became one of the most famous spectacles of the medieval world. Historians still argue about the exact size of his caravan. Some accounts claim 60,000 people, others insist the numbers were inflated by astonished chroniclers. But no one doubts it was enormous, enough to leave observers slack-jawed from Cairo to Mecca. You walk among the lines of animals and attendants. Camels groan as they're loaded with sacks of gold dust, bolts of cloth, jars of water, and bundles of dates. Horses stamp restlessly, their riders fussing with saddles. Servants lug chests so heavy you wonder if their handles will snap. And everywhere voices chatter, orders bark, and the faint sound of drums urges the chaos into rhythm. One quirky tidbit. Chroniclers mention that Musa's caravan included servants carrying staffs tipped with gold, purely for the sake of display. Imagine trudging across the Sahara with a gleaming pole just to make sure your emperor looks sufficiently fabulous. You glance at one such staff-bearer who looks sweaty but determined, probably muttering something like, "Well, at least it's good exercise." Inside the palace, more subtle preparations unfold. Advisors debate the logistics. How many waterskins per camel, which oases to aim for? How much food can be hauled before it spoils? Musa listens, his face calm, but you notice the faint crease of concern at his brow. A journey like this isn't just a spiritual statement, it's a logistical nightmare. One misplaced caravan, one lost waterhole, and disaster could strike. Historians still argue whether Musa's decision to go was purely personal devotion or a deliberate move to broadcast Mali's wealth and piety to the wider Islamic world. Probably both. He wanted the blessing of Mecca, yes, but he also wanted Cairo, Baghdad, and beyond to recognize Mali as a serious power. Faith and politics, once again braided together. As the caravan swells, the palace takes on a carnival atmosphere. Tailors sew new robes, jewelers hammer bracelets, cooks prepare preserved meats and dried fruits for the road. Children chase each other between piles of supplies, laughing until an irritated guard shoos them away. Griots compose songs in advance, verses ready to praise the emperor's devotion before he's even left the gates. On the morning of departure, you stand with Musa at the head of the procession. The city gathers, filling rooftops and alleys, their cheers rising like a wave. Dust swirls as camels rise awkwardly to their feet, loads strapped tight. Attendants adjust turbans, soldiers tighten belts, and the air rings with the sound of anticipation. Musa bows in prayer, whispers a final blessing for his empire, then mounts his horse. The caravan creaks forward, a river of people, animals, and treasure spilling out of the city gates. Drums pound in slow rhythm, horns blare, and voices chant verses that mingle with the steady thud of hooves. From above, it must look like a glittering scar moving across the landscape, the empire itself stretching into motion. As you march with them, You feel both awe and unease. The sheer size of this endeavor is staggering, almost reckless. Yet Musa's calm presence steadies the chaos. His eyes are fixed not on the dust underfoot, but on the horizon, already imagining the holy city that awaits. The empire behind him watches the dust trail fade, murmuring prayers for safe passage. And you, caught up in the shuffle of camels and clinking of gold, realize you are part of a journey that will echo through history, reshaping not only Musa's legacy, but the world's image of Mali itself. You're out on the open plain now, the palace long behind you, the caravan stretching so far that from one end you can barely see the other. Dust rises in lazy clouds, coating your throat with a chalky dryness. Camels sway in their awkward, rolling gait, their padded feet thudding softly on the hard ground. The great pilgrimage has begun in earnest, and you're trudging with the rest of them, step by step across a land that feels endless. The mainstream fact: Mansa Musa's caravan crossed the Sahara Desert, one of the harshest environments on Earth. With thousands of people, animals, and supplies, the journey required staggering organization. Caravans often followed routes that linked a chain of oases. Without them, survival was impossible. Historians still argue about which exact route Musa took. Was it the western trail through Walata, or a more central route skirting Tagaza's salt mines? Either way, he and his people faced weeks of blistering heat, sandstorms, and thirst. The rhythm of the march soon becomes hypnotic. You count steps between water stops, the sun climbing higher until the world feels like an oven. Turbans are pulled tighter, robes cling with sweat, and even the camels look irritated, flicking their tails at imaginary flies. You hear muttered prayers from servants, their voices blending with the creak of saddles and the groans of overburdened beasts. One quirky tidbit: camels were often fed dates during such treks, but greedy animals sometimes stole them straight from baggage. You spot one sly camel nudging open a sack and chewing noisily, its smug expression making a servant groan. Not again. Musa notices and chuckles softly, because even emperors know there's no winning against a camel's appetite. At night, the desert transforms. The air cools sharply. Stars blaze so bright they feel almost close enough to pluck, and fires flicker in small clusters. Attendants boil millet porridge, their laughter carrying faintly on the wind. Musa sits slightly apart, fingering prayer beads, his face lit by firelight. He recites softly, gratitude for another day's survival, for the patience of his people, for the endurance of the caravan. You join the circle of guards keeping watch, spears glinting under the moon. Their eyes scan the darkness for raiders, but the desert tonight is quiet, save for the occasional yawn of a camel or the eerie call of a desert fox. Musa, calm even here, strolls the perimeter once, nodding to each guard as if to say, "I see you, I trust you, I share this night with you." Historians still argue whether Musa's caravan truly numbered tens of thousands, or whether chroniclers inflated the figures to make the tale sound more miraculous. Whatever the truth, even a fraction of that number would have been astonishing. Miles of people trudging in unison, a river of humanity moving through a sea of sand. The days blur into a pattern. Dawn prayers, hours of marching, brief halts at oases where water is scooped greedily into cupped hands, then more trudging under the relentless sun. You wipe dust from your eyes, blink against the glare, and keep moving. Musa never falters. His pace is steady, his demeanor calm, his voice encouraging even when tempers fray and feet blister. One evening, as the caravan camps near an oasis, griots strike up songs to lift spirits. They sing of Sundiata Keita, founder of Mali, and weave Musa into the lineage with verses about his devotion and his wealth. Children clap tired hands, soldiers smile faintly, and even the camels seem less cranky for a while. Musa listens, eyes half closed, letting the rhythm carry him. By the time the caravan pushes deeper into the Sahara, you feel both weariness and awe. The desert is merciless, yes, but the discipline of the march, the rhythm of prayer, and the sheer determination of Musa's leadership carry everyone forward. You realize that this is more than travel. It's transformation. Each step burns away hesitation, leaving behind devotion, resilience, and the quiet certainty that you are part of something vast. You crest a rise of sand blinking against the glare, and suddenly the horizon changes. Minarets pierce the skyline, domes shimmer in the heat, and the buzz of voices swells louder than the endless desert silence you've grown used to. The caravan has reached Cairo, the dazzling heart of Mamluk Egypt, and you can feel the collective relief. Finally, shade, water, and the bustle of a city instead of the endless, punishing Sahara. The mainstream fact. When Musa arrived in Cairo in 1324, his wealth and generosity became the stuff of legend. Chroniclers like al-Umari later recorded how his spending and gifts of gold disrupted the local economy, lowering the value of the metal for years. Historians still argue whether the inflation was as catastrophic as described, or whether Cairo's economy simply hiccuped under the shock of so much gold arriving at once. Regardless, Musa's presence made such an impression that even European cartographers began sketching a golden king of Mali onto their maps. You follow the caravan as it pours into the city gates. Camels shuffle, bells jingling, their backs still heavy with treasure. Attendants struggle with gilded staffs, soldiers straighten their robes, and merchants peer wide-eyed from stalls, whispering, "Who is this king from the south?" Cairo has seen its share of pilgrims and traders, but nothing on this scale. The streets feel like a riverbed suddenly overwhelmed by a flood. One quirky tidbit. Some accounts claim Musa's entourage gave away so much gold that beggars and shopkeepers alike were briefly rich, only to realize later that everyone having piles of gold dust meant prices soared beyond reason. Imagine buying a simple loaf of bread one week, only to find the next week you need twice as much glitter for the same crust. Musa's generosity was sincere, but unintended consequences followed. The Sultan of Egypt, al-Malik al-Nasir, sends word that he wishes to meet this astonishing visitor. Musa, however, hesitates. Local etiquette demands that visiting rulers bow or kiss the ground before the Sultan, and Musa bristles. He is Mansa, descendant of Sundiata, ruler of Mali. Bowing to another sovereign feels wrong. You sense the tension in the palace courtyards, courtiers whispering nervously, "Will he insult the Sultan?" Historians still argue about the exact outcome of this standoff. Some sources say Musa eventually bowed after being persuaded it was merely custom, not submission. Others insist he stood tall, offering only a respectful handshake. Either way, the encounter became a delicate dance of pride and diplomacy, reminding both courts that status and dignity were currencies as valuable as gold. Meanwhile, Musa's spending spree transforms Cairo into a spectacle. He showers gifts on scholars, endows mosques, and purchases luxuries with handfuls of gold dust. Markets buzz with excitement. Shopkeepers grin until their jaws ache, and poets rush to immortalize the generosity of the mysterious West African king. You drift through the bazaars with him, dazzled by silks, spices, and jewels, all traded eagerly for the emperor's gold. Yet, amid the glitter, Musa remains composed. He still begins his days with dawn prayers, kneeling in a quiet courtyard while the city outside clamors for his wealth. He walks softly, his attendants trailing behind, his voice low and steady. Even when handing out extravagant gifts, he does so with the same calm demeanor he showed when balancing tribute ledgers back in Mali. At night, Cairo's scholars gather around him, eager to discuss theology, law, and science. Musa listens intently, asking questions, probing ideas. He isn't just scattering gold. He's cultivating connections, ensuring that when he returns home, Mali will not only be wealthier but wiser, tied more closely to the intellectual networks of the Islamic world. You watch the city sparkle under moonlight, its minarets glowing, its alleys humming with stories of the Golden King. Cairo has seen conquerors and traders, but never someone quite like Musa, a ruler who walked in quietly, prayed humbly, and then casually rewired the economy with his generosity. By the time the caravan departs, Cairo is both richer and poorer, dazzled and unsettled. Musa rides at its head, calm as ever, the desert waiting once again. Behind him, the city hums with gossip, its markets forever altered by the river of gold that briefly swept through. You trail Musa through the grand halls of Cairo's citadel, where cool stone walls rise high above tiled courtyards. The noise of the city outside fades into a muffled hum. This is not the market now. It's diplomacy, the careful dance of two powerful rulers meeting face to face. Musa, wrapped in his flowing robes, steps forward with calm precision, while the courtiers of Sultan al-Malik al-Nasir glance nervously at one another. They know this visitor is wealthy beyond measure, but how he behaves here will matter just as much as how much gold he carries. The mainstream fact. Mansa Musa's meeting with the Sultan of Egypt was one of the highlights of his pilgrimage. Contemporary accounts describe both rulers treating one another with respect, but the tension was undeniable. Historians still argue whether Musa refused outright to bow before the Sultan, or whether he allowed a compromise gesture that preserved his dignity. Either way, the encounter showed just how confident the Emperor of Mali was. He saw himself as an equal, not a supplicant. The chamber smells faintly of incense and polished wood. Musa bows his head politely, but he doesn't fling himself onto the ground in submission. Courtiers shift in their seats, glancing toward the Sultan, who arches one eyebrow but gestures for Musa to approach. You can almost hear the whispered subtext. Fine. We will treat you as an equal. One quirky tidbit. Accounts suggest that Musa's attendants, perhaps more nervous than their master, fumbled during the audience, dropping gifts, mispronouncing names, or shuffling awkwardly on the polished floors. You imagine one hapless servant nearly tripping over his own gilded staff, recovering just in time, while Musa keeps his serene expression intact. The two rulers exchange courtesies. Musa speaks of his devotion, his journey across the desert, and his wish for blessing as he continues to Mecca. The Sultan listens, nodding gravely, perhaps thinking more about the economic earthquake Musa's gold is causing in Cairo's markets than about the spiritual significance of the pilgrimage. Still, he offers Musa hospitality, gifts, and safe passage onward. Historians still argue about the tone of this meeting. Was it cordial, marked by mutual respect, or was there a simmering tension, each ruler quietly asserting dominance in his own way. Some chronicles suggest Musa insisted on keeping his throne elevated slightly higher than the chairs offered, a subtle signal of equal status. Others dismiss this as legend. Either way, it is clear that Musa's presence shook the usual balance of power in Cairo. After the formalities, gifts are exchanged. Musa presents gold, so much gold that the courtiers gasp despite themselves. He also offers fine textiles, carved ivory, and even slaves, though the gold overshadows all else. The Sultan responds with robes, horses, and delicate crafted items, tokens of respect, but nothing to rival the sheer abundance Musa casually provides. As the meeting concludes, you walk with Musa back into the palace courtyard. His expression is calm, but you sense the satisfaction beneath it. He has navigated the etiquette without humiliation, made his point without arrogance, and left behind an impression that will echo for decades. That night, back at the caravan's encampment outside Cairo, Musa reflects with his advisors. They recount every detail of the audience, replaying who said what and how the Sultan reacted. Musa listens quietly, then simply nods. "Respect is not given," he murmurs, fingering his prayer beads. "It is earned, or carried across the desert." The fires die down, the stars wheel overhead, and you realize this meeting wasn't just a polite formality. It was a statement. Mali, far to the south, was not a distant curiosity. It was an empire whose ruler could stride into Cairo, meet one of the great sultans of the age, and walk out as an equal. The city of Cairo still hums from Musa's presence, but now the real spectacle begins. You follow him into the markets and mosques, watching as his attendants fan out with chests of gold dust, eager to exchange, gift, and sometimes just sprinkle the wealth of Mali onto whoever happens to be nearby. Musa himself remains calm, almost understated, but the ripple effects of his generosity are anything but small. The mainstream fact: Musa's spending spree in Cairo became one of the most famous episodes of his pilgrimage. Chroniclers record that he distributed so much gold that he destabilized the local economy for over a decade. Prices soared. Gold's value plummeted, and merchants who thought themselves lucky to receive gifts discovered that sudden wealth could be as disruptive as poverty. Historians still argue about the exact scale of the damage. Was it truly catastrophic or simply exaggerated by astonished observers? But all agree it was unprecedented. You wander through a bazaar with him. The air is thick with spice: cinnamon, cumin, cardamom. Traders shout offers, silk fabrics shimmer in the sun, and jewelers polish rings with deliberate flair. Musa pauses at a stall, admires a bolt of fine cloth, and gestures casually. An attendant drops a handful of gold dust into the merchant's palm. The man nearly drops it in shock, eyes wide, mouth working silently. All around, whispers spread. This king spends gold like water. One quirky tidbit: some Cairo poets composed verses on the spot, praising Musa's generosity and reciting them loudly in the markets, hoping to be rewarded. Imagine someone shouting improvised rhymes about how handsome and holy you look while you're just trying to buy a rug. Musa listens politely, nods, and yes, rewards them with more gold. The caravan itself becomes part of the spectacle. Attendants parade through the streets, their golden staffs gleaming, their robes dazzlingly embroidered. Servants hand coins to beggars, shower gifts on scholars, and casually tip musicians more than most shopkeepers earn in a month. Even children chase after the procession, holding out little hands, laughing when coins clink into their palms. Historians still argue whether Musa fully understood the economic chaos his generosity caused. Did he knowingly overwhelm Cairo's economy, or did he simply underestimate the ripple effect of so much sudden gold? Whatever the case, you can sense he wasn't concerned with balance sheets in that moment. His aim was devotion and reputation, to show the world that Mali's wealth was unmatched. In quieter moments, Musa attends prayers at Cairo's mosques. He kneels humbly on mats worn smooth by generations, whispering the same verses as any pilgrim. Around him, the buzz of curiosity never ceases. Scholars, traders, and officials sneaking glances at the emperor who seems to embody both piety and extravagance at once. One evening, you sit with him in a courtyard. The stars blink above, and the city murmurs beyond the walls. Musa smiles faintly as musicians pluck strings nearby. He tells his advisors to commission buildings back in Mali using the architects he has met here, ensuring that the spirit of Cairo will travel south with him. His generosity is not only for show, it is an investment in memory, in legacy, in a Mali that will glow brighter after his return. The next morning, Cairo wakes to find its markets flooded with gold, its beggars suddenly wealthy, its merchants giddy and confused. Bread costs more, spices double in price, and the city hums with arguments as much as celebrations. Musa, calm as ever, mounts his horse, ready to continue his journey east. For him, Cairo was just one stop, albeit one that will echo for generations. You glance back at the city gates as the caravan files out, leaving behind a trail of whispers, debts, and dazzled memories. Cairo will never forget the Golden King from the south, and neither will the chroniclers, who will pen stories so vivid that even centuries later, you can almost hear the clink of coins tumbling into astonished hands. The dust of Cairo still clings to your robes, but soon it gives way to the rhythm of the pilgrimage proper. You march with Musa and his caravan eastward, joining throngs of pilgrims converging from every corner of the Islamic world. The desert road is alive with humanity, processions of North African traders, groups of Turkish scholars in layered robes, Yemeni farmers carrying bundles of dates, all chanting verses in unison. The great river of faith flows toward Mecca, and you are caught in its current. The mainstream fact: the Hajj was and remains one of the 5 pillars of Islam, obligatory for those able to make the journey. For Musa, this pilgrimage was more than duty. It was devotion and diplomacy rolled together. Historians still argue whether he planned from the beginning to turn it into such a grand display, or whether the scale grew almost accidentally as his generosity snowballed. But by the time he reached the holy cities, his name was already traveling faster than his caravan. The nights along the way shimmer with devotion. Imagine thousands of pilgrims gathered in open encampments, fires dotting the desert like scattered jewels. You hear voices blending into a single chant. Labbaik, Allahumma labbaik. Here I am, O God, here I am. Musa kneels among them, his voice low, his brow pressed into the earth, indistinguishable from the farmer praying beside him. His gold may set him apart in the markets, but in the rituals of the Hajj, he is simply another servant of God. One quirky tidbit. Some pilgrims brought along live goats or sheep for sacrifice at Mecca, leading to comical roadside encounters as bleeding animals tried to break free. You imagine one goat wriggling from its tether, sprinting straight through the middle of Musa's dignified entourage, leaving soldiers scrambling while the emperor tries not to laugh. The rituals intensify as you near Mecca. Musa joins the great crowd circling the Kaaba, the cube-shaped sanctuary draped in black cloth, every voice rising in unison. You feel the crush of humanity around you, the press of shoulders, the dust of thousands of sandals grinding into the stone floor. The air smells of sweat, incense, and the faint sweetness of water shared sparingly among pilgrims. Musa's voice is steady, his hands lifted in supplication. For all his gold and grandeur, here he is equal, one among countless faces turned toward God. Historians still argue whether Musa's personal devotion during the Hajj was overshadowed by the sheer spectacle of his caravan. Did pilgrims whisper reverently about his humility, or did they gossip more about the weight of his gifts? Likely both. His name became tied not just to piety, but to extravagance, leaving him forever remembered as the ruler who made the holy journey look like a royal procession. In Mecca itself, Musa endows scholars, donates generously to the holy sanctuaries, and ensures that Mali's presence is felt. He meets jurists, theologians, and poets, listening intently, commissioning works and extending his network of knowledge. His gold builds mosques and funds students, but his demeanor remains quiet, reverent. He prays not as a king flaunting wealth, but as a man seeking forgiveness and blessing. You stand with him at the plain of Arafat, where pilgrims gather to plead for mercy. The crowd stretches farther than your eyes can see, waves of white-robed figures swaying gently under the searing sun. Musa raises his hands, tears glinting at the corners of his eyes, his lips whispering prayers carried away by the wind. In that moment, there is no empire, no throne, no gold, only faith, as vast and humbling as the desert itself. At night, back at the encampment, the songs of pilgrims drift across the sands. Musa sits silently, a small lamp flickering beside him, his prayer beads clicking softly in his hand. His attendants, exhausted, collapse onto mats, but Musa remains upright, lost in quiet reflection. The wealth of Mali may have dazzled the world, but here the true measure of his journey lies in moments like this. A man at prayer under a limitless sky, whispering his soul into the silence. The holy city lies behind you now, its minarets receding into memory as the caravan once more bends its path westward. You feel the weight of the journey differently this time. Not just the desert dust and the endless shuffle of feet, but the added load of scholars, architects, and artisans who have agreed to follow Musa home. The road to Mali is no simple return. It is a river of culture flowing back toward the Sahel. The mainstream fact: Musa famously brought back with him architects, jurists, and scholars from Cairo and Mecca. Their influence reshaped Mali's cities, especially Timbuktu and Gao, leaving a legacy of learning and monumental architecture. Historians still argue whether all the figures credited to Musa's entourage truly accompanied him, or whether some were later additions to the story. But it is undeniable that his return journey was enriched with more than just treasure. It was filled with minds. You march alongside the caravan, hearing the new voices among the crowd. A Syrian architect debates with a Malian mason about the best mixture of mud and straw for durability. A scholar from Cairo recites poetry in flowing Arabic, his words bouncing off the curious ears of young Malian attendants. Musa listens, sometimes smiling, sometimes furrowing his brow, always absorbing. His empire will not only glitter, it will think, study, and write. One quirky tidbit: some accounts claim that Musa even brought back entire crates of books, so many that they rivaled the value of gold. You imagine attendants groaning as they lug stacks of heavy manuscripts across sand dunes, muttering, "Gold would have been lighter than this." Yet for Musa, knowledge weighed more than treasure. The caravan itself is visibly heavier with the spoils of devotion and diplomacy. Gifts from the Sultan of Egypt, rare textiles from Arabia, and exotic animals sway nervously on leashes or in cages. Children point excitedly at unfamiliar creatures, while guards mutter about the logistics of feeding them. Musa rides steadily, unbothered by the commotion, his mind already back in Mali, picturing mosques rising and libraries filling. Historians still argue whether Musa's return was as flamboyant as his arrival in Cairo, but what's clear is that his fame preceded him. On the road, traders, pilgrims, and even rival rulers recognize him, bowing or craning necks for a glimpse of the emperor who had humbled Cairo's markets with gold. You can sense how word of his pilgrimage spreads faster than the caravan itself, reaching Europe, where cartographers sketch a golden king of Mali onto maps long before most Europeans could pronounce his name. The desert crossing home is as brutal as before. Sandstorms whip the caravan, water runs low, tempers fray. But Musa remains calm, steady, a pillar around which the entire river of people flows. His prayers punctuate each dawn and dusk, his voice carrying reassurance even in exhaustion. At night, fires dot the encampment, and you hear griots practicing new songs. They sing not only of wealth, but of wisdom, of foreign scholars and exotic tales, of a ruler who carried faith across continents. The children in the caravan already chant verses about their emperor, their voices rising under the desert stars. One evening, Musa gathers his closest advisors. The air smells faintly of roasted meat and smoke. He outlines plans for his return. Timbuktu will rise with new mosques, Gao will swell with markets, and libraries will spread knowledge like the Niger spreads water. His voice is soft but firm, and you sense the vision solidifying in his mind. The pilgrimage was not an end, it was a beginning. And so you walk with him, step by step, back toward Mali. The gold may dwindle, the food supplies thin, the animals stumble under loads, but Musa's eyes remain fixed on the horizon. For him, the return is not about arriving safely. It is about carrying back the seeds of transformation, ready to be planted in the soil of empire. You return at last to Mali, where the dust of the pilgrimage settles into stories, and stories harden into plans. The caravan has limped back, weary but triumphant, and Musa wastes no time turning vision into stone. You follow him through the heart of Timbuktu, where mud brick houses huddle close together, and the air buzzes with the sound of construction. The city is about to change forever. The mainstream fact. Musa's return from the Hajj ushered in a building boom. He commissioned mosques, palaces, and learning centers, employing architects like Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, a scholar and builder from Andalusia. One of the most famous structures attributed to this era is the Jingwereber Mosque in Timbuktu, built with mud, straw, and wood in a distinctive Sudano-Sahelian style. Historians still argue how much of the design can be credited directly to al-Sahili, but Musa's patronage undeniably transformed Timbuktu into a city of faith and scholarship. You walk into a construction site alive with energy. Workers balance baskets of wet mud on their heads, stacking them into high walls. Children giggle as they stomp straw into the clay mixture, their feet squelching with each step. Musa watches with a faint smile, issuing calm orders to overseers. He isn't merely a ruler funding projects, he is present, his robes dusted with flecks of earth, as if to show that this vision belongs to everyone. One quirky tidbit: builders often used wooden beams jutting out of mosque walls, not just for structural support, but also as handy scaffolding for later repairs. To this day, the beams stick out like the ribs of ancient giants, giving the architecture its distinctive look. You can almost imagine a worker centuries later, clambering up those beams with a bucket of fresh mud, muttering thanks to Musa for thinking ahead. The Jingareber Mosque rises slowly but surely, its minaret pointing like a finger toward heaven. Scholars wander through half-finished courtyards, already debating where classrooms will sit, where manuscripts will be copied, where lectures will echo. Musa listens, nodding gravely, sometimes adding a suggestion, more often letting the scholars dream. His role is not to dictate every detail, but to ensure the foundation, both literal and figurative, is strong. Historians still argue whether Musa's patronage was motivated more by sincere piety or by a desire to show off Mali's sophistication to the Islamic world. Yet, standing beside him, you sense both at work. His prayers are genuine, whispered at dawn against the backdrop of rising walls. But he also smiles knowingly when foreign visitors gape at the scale of Timbuktu's transformation. Faith and reputation intertwined once more. You stroll through the growing city as other projects sprout. Smaller mosques dot neighborhoods. Palaces are refurbished, and gardens are laid out with irrigation channels sparkling under the sun. Markets expand to keep pace with the influx of builders and scholars. The air is filled with the sound of hammers, the smell of wet clay, and the laughter of children chasing each other between half-built walls. One evening, Musa sits on a rooftop, gazing out at the city. The skyline glows orange in the fading light, minarets and scaffolding rising like fingers against the horizon. He fingers his prayer beads, murmuring softly, then pauses to watch a boy carrying a jug of water for the builders. "This," he whispers, "is the future." And you, standing beside him, realize that the pilgrimage was not an end at all. It was the spark that lit the building boom, the inspiration that turned Timbuktu from a dusty trading town into a beacon of learning and devotion. Every brick laid tonight is a story in progress, one that will echo long after Musa himself has returned to the earth. You wander through Timbuktu on a cool morning when the call to prayer has faded and the streets hum softly with scribes setting out their tools. The scent of ink and parchment mingles with dust, and you find yourself drawn into dim, shaded rooms where lamps flicker over stacks of manuscripts. This is the heartbeat of Musa's dream. The libraries that will make his empire's name echo not only in wealth, but in wisdom. The mainstream fact: under Musa's patronage, Timbuktu blossomed into one of the greatest centers of learning in the medieval world. The Sankore Mosque became a university, attracting scholars from across Africa and the Islamic world. Thousands of manuscripts on law, theology, astronomy, and poetry filled its shelves. Historians still argue about the scale. Some say there were hundreds of thousands of texts in Timbuktu at its peak. Others suggest more modest but still staggering numbers. What is certain is that Musa's support planted the seeds of an intellectual tradition that outlasted even his empire. You slip inside one of the libraries. The air is cool, thick with the smell of parchment and the faintly sweet aroma of ink made from gum arabic. Scribes sit cross-legged, dipping reed pens into inkwells, their hands moving steadily as they copy lines of elegant Arabic script. The scratch of pen against parchment is oddly soothing, a sound like quiet rain. Musa enters, robes brushing the floor, and the scribes pause only long enough to bow before returning to their work. One quirky tidbit. Manuscripts here were often stored in leather satchels or wrapped in cloth, tucked into niches in the walls. Some families treated them like heirlooms, passing books down generations as if they were jewelry. Imagine opening a family chest expecting pearls and finding instead a dusty astronomy text covered in careful notes from your great-grandfather. Musa smiles at the thought, knowledge as treasure more enduring than gold. The scholars of Timbuktu gather around Musa in lively debates. One argues passionately about the finer points of Islamic law, another recites a poem about desert winds and lost caravans, while yet another explains the movements of stars with diagrams scratched in the sand. Musa listens with patience, occasionally asking a question, more often just letting the flow of words wash over him. His joy is not in showing off his own learning, but in creating a space where others can thrive. Historians still argue whether Musa personally studied deeply or preferred to surround himself with scholars who embodied the learning he valued. Either way, his reign became synonymous with patronage of knowledge. You can feel it in these rooms, the excitement of young students, the steady discipline of elders, the quiet confidence that ideas here matter as much as armies or trade. The Sankore complex itself grows like a living organism. Classrooms buzz with recitations, courtyards ring with the sound of disputations, and the walls themselves seem to hum with thought. At night, lamps glow softly as students huddle over manuscripts, their lips moving as they memorize passages, their eyes bleary but determined. Outside, the desert sky is a blanket of stars, and somewhere a camel groans in its sleep. But here, in these halls, minds stretch across time and space. One evening, Musa visits a classroom where a scholar is teaching astronomy. The man points upward, tracing constellations with a stick of chalk on a mud wall. Students nod, murmuring questions, their faces glowing in the lamplight. Musa tilts his head, smiling faintly. He has seen the Sahara sky in all its vastness, and now he sees his people learning to chart it. That, too, is wealth. Less tangible than gold dust, but brighter, more lasting. And so, the libraries of Timbuktu grow. Pages accumulate, shelves groan, debates sharpen, and the city earns a reputation that will echo across the centuries. You realize, walking among the parchment and ink, that this is Musa's quietest yet most enduring gift. A city where knowledge is cherished, where books are wealth, and where the empire's true legacy is not in coins, but in words. The scholarly hum of Timbuktu fades as you wander into the open-air bustle of the markets. Here, life is less about parchment and more about bargaining, laughter, and the daily shuffle of goods that keep the empire fed and clothed. The sun hangs hot overhead, beating down on stalls shaded with woven mats. Dust swirls at your feet, and the air is alive with the shouts of traders hawking their wares in a dozen different tongues. The mainstream fact: Mali's wealth rested not only on gold, but also on the vibrant markets of its cities. Timbuktu and Gao became hubs where goods from across Africa and beyond mingled. Salt from Tagaza, kola nuts from the forests, cloth dyed in deep indigo, fish from the Niger, and even goods from as far as North Africa and the Middle East. Historians still argue how much of this trade was tightly controlled by the state versus managed by independent merchants, but everyone agrees that Mali's markets were legendary. You stroll between stalls, the scents pulling you in every direction. A butcher sharpens his knife while displaying cuts of goat. A woman fans smoke over a basket of dried fish, the sharp tang making your nose twitch. Another seller arranges kola nuts in neat piles, their reddish shells gleaming in the light. Children weave through the crowd carrying trays of roasted peanuts, giggling when customers toss them coins. One quirky tidbit. In some West African markets, salt was so valuable that slabs of it were used almost like currency, stacked carefully like precious ingots. You see a trader arguing loudly over whether his salt block is full weight or slightly chipped. His indignation as dramatic as if someone had clipped his purse strings. Musa, strolling by, chuckles softly, amused that salt, so ordinary at the table, could rival gold in worth. The emperor does not hide himself away today. He mingles openly, pausing to ask a merchant about his journey or to bless a woman's newborn cradled in a cloth sling. People bow low, their eyes wide, but Musa keeps his voice gentle, reminding them he is not only a distant ruler, but a fellow pilgrim of faith and life. Historians still argue whether Musa's direct presence in markets was common practice or more symbolic appearances staged for effect. Either way, the image matters. An emperor visible among his people, sharing in the rhythms of buying and selling, signaling that the markets are as vital to Mali's strength as armies or palaces. You hear gossip drifting between stalls. Traders from the desert mutter about bandits near the salt mines. A fisherman complains about crocodiles stealing his nets. A griot plucks his lute and improvises a song about a goat that wandered into a spice stall, knocking over pepper pots. The crowd laughs, tossing him coins, while the unlucky goat owner scowls. The whole scene is alive with humor, struggle, and resilience, the daily fabric of empire. Musa pauses at a spice seller's stall, breathing in the sharp fragrance of ground pepper mixed with cloves. He purchases generously, handing over gold dust that makes the seller's eyes widen. But Musa also offers advice. A portion of these spices will be sent as gifts to scholars and imams, reminding everyone that even in the hum of trade, faith and learning are never far. As the afternoon wears on, the marketplace becomes louder, hotter, more chaotic. But it is a joyful chaos, a testament to the empire's wealth and diversity. You realize that this, more than palaces or treasuries, is the real engine of Mali. The chatter of bargaining, the laughter of children, the smell of spices and fish, the flow of goods that keeps everyone fed, clothed, and dreaming of tomorrow. By evening, the stalls pack up, dust rises, and the sun sinks low. Musa lingers a moment, watching families carry home their purchases, listening to the fading hum of voices. He smiles, satisfied. Markets may look ordinary, but they are the empire's heartbeat, and tonight that heartbeat is strong. The sun dips low and the marketplace quiets, but Musa's empire does not sleep inwardly. Tonight you join him in a candlelit hall where maps and scrolls cover low wooden tables. This is the world of diplomacy, a quieter but no less vital stage of empire. Here, Musa stretches Mali's reach not just with armies or markets, but with words, gifts, and carefully timed gestures across oceans and deserts. The mainstream fact. Under Musa, Mali became known far beyond West Africa. His pilgrimage spread his reputation to Egypt and Arabia, and stories of his gold reached as far as Venice and Genoa. Ambassadors carried his name to distant courts, where kings and sultans suddenly realized the Sahel was not a backwater, but a powerhouse. Historians still argue about the extent of these embassies, whether Musa's envoys reached as far as Morocco and Iberia, or whether some tales of European encounters are later exaggerations. But Mali's diplomatic presence during his reign was real and significant. You lean over one of the maps. It's not the detailed atlas you're used to. It's a parchment dotted with rivers and vague outlines of deserts, annotated with notes like salt mines and camel days. Musa listens as advisors explain the routes of embassies, north to Morocco, east toward Cairo, across the Sahara to Berber traders who will carry his greetings even farther. His fingers tap lightly on the parchment, his eyes steady. One quirky tidbit. When ambassadors traveled, they often carried kola nuts as diplomatic gifts. These little caffeine-packed seeds were exotic luxuries in the north. You imagine a Moroccan courtier biting into one for the first time, grimacing at the bitter taste but nodding politely because, well, it came from the Golden King of Mali. The hall fills with murmurs as envoys rehearse their speeches. One man practices his bow, tripping slightly on his robes. Another fumbles with a chest, spilling gold dust across the floor. Musa chuckles softly, reminding them that generosity will speak louder than perfect posture. His calm presence steadies them. Historians still argue whether Musa actively courted European powers or whether his fame reached them indirectly through traders. What is clear is that cartographers like those in Catalonia soon began sketching Mali's king on their maps, crown gleaming, golden orb in hand. Reputation, Musa knows, is itself a kind of power, shaping how distant lands treat your envoys before they even arrive. You travel in your imagination with one such ambassador. He trudges across the Sahara, the desert wind tugging at his cloak. At each oasis, traders lean in, eager for news of the emperor who gave away gold like grain. By the time he reaches Morocco, his words are less report than legend, each retelling adding a little more sparkle. In a candlelit court, he bows, presents gifts, and repeats Musa's blessings. The audience leans forward, dazzled, already dreaming of caravans bound south. Back in Timbuktu, Musa listens to reports of these embassies. He nods at news of treaties sealed, trade routes strengthened, scholars intrigued. He never boasts. His satisfaction is quiet, measured. But you can sense his awareness of the larger game. Mali is no longer a name whispered only along caravan paths. It is a player on the grand stage, one whose ruler can sit at the same table as sultans and kings, his voice carrying across deserts and seas. The night deepens and lamps sputter. Musa dismisses his envoys with a blessing, then retreats to his chamber. Outside, the city sleeps, but somewhere, far away, his name is being spoken in a foreign tongue, carried on the lips of diplomats who spread both truth and legend. And you realize this is another form of empire, not in land, but in perception. A golden thread weaving Mali into the world's imagination. The night winds soften as you step into the quieter quarters of the palace, where the air smells less of incense and more of cooking fires. Here, away from the echoing council halls and grand ceremonies, lies Musa's private world, his family. Queens move through the courtyards with the confidence of women who know their opinions shape the empire, and children dart between attendants, their laughter cutting through the solemn silence of politics. The mainstream fact: Musa had multiple wives and children, as was common for rulers of his time. Royal marriages weren't just about affection, they were political tools, weaving bonds between provinces, noble families, and even rival factions. His children and relatives would later inherit parts of his empire, though succession was not always smooth. Historians still argue about the exact number of Musa's wives and heirs, since chronicles often exaggerate or contradict one another. But it's clear his household was both large and influential. You find Musa seated in a shaded veranda, one child perched on his knee, while another tugs at his robes, demanding a story. He obliges, voice calm and steady, weaving a tale of ancestors who wrestled lions or tricked spirits in the forest. The children's eyes grow wide, their giggles rising when Musa adds a playful growl to his voice. For a moment, the emperor is simply a father, not the wealthiest ruler on earth. One quirky tidbit. West African lullabies often included references to crocodiles and hyenas, creatures you might not think of as soothing bedtime companions. Imagine being rocked to sleep with a gentle song about how the hyena is watching, so you'd better behave. Musa hums one of these tunes now, his children half laughing, half shivering as they press closer. The queens of the palace, too, are figures of weight. They oversee the household, manage attendance, and sometimes intervene in politics. You overhear one quietly reminding Musa about a governor who owes tribute, her tone firm enough to make even the emperor raise an eyebrow. Behind the veil of the throne, the influence of these women is undeniable. Historians still argue how much direct power Musa's queens wielded, but griots hint that their voices shaped decisions more often than chroniclers admitted. Watching them glide through the courtyards, you sense their authority. It's in the tilt of a chin, the calm with which they dismiss nervous servants, the ease with which they remind Musa of matters he might prefer to postpone. The children, meanwhile, grow up amid both privilege and tension. Tutors drill them in Quranic recitation, scribes teach them the flowing curves of Arabic script, and guards ensure they know how to sit straight at public banquets. But rivalry simmers under the surface. Cousins eye each other warily. Servants whisper about who might one day inherit. Musa pretends not to notice, though you can see the flicker of concern when he watches his sons bicker too fiercely over a wooden toy. In the evenings, the family gathers for meals. Platters of rice, stewed lamb, and bowls of honey cakes fill the table. Musa eats sparingly, but he ensures the children are well fed, encouraging them to share politely instead of hoarding the sweetest bites. One daughter smirks as she sneaks an extra cake when no one is looking. Musa catches her eye and lets her keep it, a small wink softening the rules. Later, as the lamps burn low, the family listens to griots sing. The songs shift easily between grand tales of empire and smaller verses about domestic life. One griot sings humorously about a queen who scolded her husband for leaving muddy footprints on the veranda. The courtiers laugh nervously, but Musa chuckles openly, clapping his hands. Even emperors, after all, are husbands who forget to wipe their shoes. And so, in these quiet courtyards, you glimpse the human side of the Golden King. He is a father telling stories, a husband listening to his wife's sharp reminders, a man who smiles at his daughter's mischief. The empire may glitter with wealth, but its heart beats here, in the warmth and worries of Musa's family, echoing softly beneath the desert stars. The palace is lively in daylight, but if you lean close enough, you can hear the other rhythm beneath the drums and prayers. Murmurs of unease, whispers carried like dust through the courtyards. Musa's empire is vast and wealthy, yet wealth is as much burden as blessing. Tonight, you walk with him through the quieter chambers where advisors gather, their voices low, their brows furrowed. Trouble, as always, is stirring. The mainstream fact: later in Musa's reign, cracks began to show in Mali's stability. Vast empires are difficult to govern, and distance breeds rebellion. Provinces grumbled under heavy tribute. Rival factions within the royal family sharpened their ambitions, and the constant flow of gold sometimes destabilized rather than strengthened. Historians still argue whether Musa faced widespread revolts or only localized unrest, since chronicles disagree on the scale. What's certain is that even a golden empire could not escape tension. You hear reports carried into council chambers. Messengers arrive dusty from travel, bowing before speaking quickly. One province late with taxes, another bristling under a governor's rule. Caravans harassed by raiders. Musa listens silently, his prayer beads slipping one by one through his fingers. He doesn't shout or slam the table, he waits. His silence stretches so long that advisors shuffle nervously, until finally he speaks, measured and calm, his words like water smoothing stone. One quirky tidbit: raiders in the Sahara sometimes used trained camels to lure caravans into ambushes. The animals would wander ahead with bells jingling, convincing merchants they'd found another caravan, until armed riders appeared out of the dunes. Musa chuckles faintly when hearing such reports, muttering, "Even camels play politics." Still, the humor doesn't soften the worry. You see Musa's shoulders droop when the chamber empties. He knows that holding together a kingdom this vast is like trying to clutch sand. Grains always slip through, no matter how firm the grip. Historians still argue whether Musa's religious devotion clashed with traditional practices in some regions, fueling unrest. Did some communities resent stricter Islamic judges? Did rival branches of the Keita dynasty quietly plot against him? The truth is tangled in silence, but Musa feels the weight of it. You follow him into the courtyard, where soldiers drill with spears. Their rhythmic stomping and shouted commands echo confidence. But Musa knows the real test lies not in displays of discipline, but in loyalty tested far from the capital. He watches quietly, nodding, though his eyes are distant. At night, griots sing songs of his pilgrimage and wealth, but you notice Musa gazing past the fire, lost in thought. His lips move in silent prayer, perhaps asking for strength, perhaps asking for forgiveness. He understands what many rulers forget, that glory shines brightest when shadows are gathering. One evening, he strolls along the riverbank, the Niger's waters glinting faintly in moonlight. A child splashes in the shallows, laughter ringing out. Musa pauses, listening, then sighs. "This is why I hold the empire together," he whispers. "Not for gold, not for songs, but for peace. The simple peace of children laughing at dusk." And so, while the empire hums with wealth, Musa carries the heavier tune of its cracks and strains. He is no fool. He knows rebellions may rise, governors may fail, cousins may scheme. But his calm remains, his prayers steady, his patience a shield against the chaos. You realize, then, that even the richest man in history could not buy immunity from unrest. Gold can dazzle, but it cannot silence discontent. Still, as Musa retreats to his chambers, his face lit by lamplight, you sense his resolve. The empire may strain, but he will hold it together as long as his breath allows. The moon is high over Niani when Musa gathers his closest advisors, scribes, and family members. The hall is quieter than usual, the torches burning lower, the voices softer, more measured. You sense it immediately. Musa is thinking of the future, of what will remain when his hands no longer hold the empire's reins. Tonight is not about conquest or ceremonies, it is about legacy. The mainstream fact. Musa, like many rulers of great empires, made provisions for succession and endowments to religious and scholarly institutions. Chroniclers note that he gave generously to mosques, libraries, and scholars, ensuring his wealth fueled knowledge and devotion long after him. Historians still argue about how carefully he planned his succession. Some sources say his son Magan Rai was designated heir. Others suggest rival claims muddied the line. But what is clear is that Musa understood the fragility of empires and wanted his memory preserved through faith and learning as much as gold. You watch him dictate to scribes, their pens scratching steadily against parchment. He speaks of gifts, land for mosques, stipends for scholars, support for judges. His tone is calm but purposeful, like a man planting trees he knows he will never sit beneath. He does not think only of wealth. He thinks of order, of the steady rhythm of prayers and study that will keep the empire's soul alive. One quirky tidbit: in some West African traditions, rulers would bury symbolic items, like handfuls of millet or carved wooden figures, as part of legacy rituals, representing fertility and continuity. You can almost picture Musa smiling at the custom, thinking, gold may dazzle, but millet keeps bellies full. He may not abandon tradition entirely. Instead, he blends it with his devotion to Islam, weaving two legacies together. The conversation turns to his family. Musa speaks of his sons, weighing their strengths and weaknesses with the patience of a man long accustomed to listening more than he speaks. He knows that rivalry lurks, that cousins and uncles will whisper as soon as he is gone. His solution is not ironclad decrees, but generosity, spreading gifts, honors, and responsibilities to soften ambition with gratitude. Will it work? Historians still argue, but Musa tries nonetheless. You follow him later into a courtyard lit by the soft glow of oil lamps. He sits beneath an acacia tree, prayer beads slipping between his fingers. His children approach timidly, one daughter handing him a bowl of water. He blesses her softly, his voice tender, then calls his sons to kneel. An empire, he says quietly, is heavier than gold. Carry it with faith. His words hang in the night air, simple yet profound. Advisors bring in gifts for sealing his legacy: bolts of indigo cloth, jars of salt, carved ivory, manuscripts copied by scribes. Musa touches each, instructing where it should go, this to a mosque, that to a library, another to support a scholar. His hands move slowly, almost reverently, as though each act of giving eases the burden on his heart. Historians still argue whether Musa truly foresaw the struggles his successors would face, or whether he believed his careful planning would hold firm. But sitting here, you sense he knows. No plan is perfect, no gift eternal, no empire unbreakable. And yet, he builds anyway, layering faith and generosity into the foundation of Mali's tomorrow. By midnight, the hall is quiet. The scribes lay down their pens, their fingers smudged with ink. Musa bows his head in prayer, whispering blessings for his people, his children, his scholars, his soldiers. The lamplight flickers, casting his shadow across the walls. Tall, steady, but fading at the edges. And you realize, standing nearby, that this is what legacy truly is. Not the gold glittering in jars, but the steady intention of a ruler who hopes that when the dust of time settles, his empire will still hum with prayer, learning, and the laughter of children at play. The air feels heavier these days, as though the Sahel itself has slowed to match the rhythm of Musa's steps. He rises later, walks more carefully, his attendants hovering close as if each breath of wind might topple him. You follow quietly, noticing how his once firm stride across palace courtyards has softened into something slower, measured, a man carrying years as much as robes. The mainstream fact. Mansa Musa ruled for roughly 25 years, from around 1312 to 1337. In his later days, he withdrew more from public life, focusing on prayer, reflection, and preparing his heir, Maghan Furein, to succeed him. Historians still argue about the exact year of his death. Some say 1332, others 1337, with disagreements rooted in conflicting chronicles. What is clear is that his final days were marked not by spectacle but by weariness and faith. You watch him sit beneath the shade of a baobab tree, the wide trunk dwarfing his figure. Children still run past, their laughter carrying, but Musa no longer joins their games with a smile. Instead, he fingers prayer beads, lips moving in steady rhythm, eyes distant. His wealth and glory feel far away now. His attention has turned inward, toward God and memory. One quirky tidbit. Elderly rulers in Mali sometimes used carved wooden staffs not only as walking aids, but as symbols of wisdom, the designs etched into them telling stories of ancestors. Musa carries one now, its polished surface smooth beneath his palm, the grooves whispering histories he helped extend. It steadies him when his knees tremble, though he pretends not to lean on it too much. The palace adapts to his frailty. Advisors grow louder in debates, knowing Musa's voice may not cut as sharply as before. Sons circle more closely. Cousins whisper more boldly, the inevitable struggle for succession stirring. Musa listens with weary patience, offering guidance when asked, sometimes simply raising a hand to silence them all. His authority, even diminished, still commands. Historians still argue whether Musa fully retired before his death, naming Magan as ruler while he remained alive, or whether his reign continued formally until the end. Either way, the transition began before his body gave way, his empire already adjusting to a world after Musa. At dusk, you accompany him to the mosque. The light filters through narrow windows, painting his face in gold. He bows slowly, carefully lowering himself, attendants steadying his arms. His whispered prayers linger longer than before, his pauses stretching as though reluctant to rise again. You sense his weariness, but also his peace. He has built, he has prayed, he has given. Now he is letting go. One evening he gathers his family. The courtyard smells of smoke and spiced rice, but no feast is laid. Instead, Musa speaks softly, his voice rasping. He blesses his sons, urges them to protect the scholars, reminds them that gold is nothing without justice. His daughters sit silently, some weeping, while the younger children fidget, not fully grasping the weight of the moment. Later, alone, Musa walks slowly along the riverbank. The Niger flows dark and steady, its surface glimmering with stars. He murmurs, "Empires rise and fall, but the river endures." His words drift with the current, carried into the night. And so, in these final days, you witness not the grandeur of caravans or the thunder of armies, but the quiet resilience of a man who knows his time is closing. He is not afraid, only tired, ready to return to the God he served with prayer, and to the earth he walked with patience. The greatest king in history now whispers like the breeze through acacia leaves, his glory softened into memory, his footsteps fading into the sand. The palace is subdued now, its courtyards echoing with softer footsteps, its walls heavy with absence. Musa is gone. Whether in 1332 or 1337, historians still argue, citing contradictory chronicles, the exact year blurs, but what is certain is that the Golden King has slipped into memory. The empire remains, but without its patient guardian, the balance begins to shift. The mainstream fact. Musa's successor was his son, Maghan I, who inherited a throne laden with wealth but also with the strain of governing such a vast territory. Magahan struggled to match his father's charisma, generosity, and careful leadership. Under later successors, Mali's borders would shrink, though for a time the glow of Musa's reign still illuminated its reputation abroad. You walk through the palace gardens with Magan, a younger man with the crown heavy on his brow. Courtiers bow, but their murmurs are sharper now, some testing the new ruler's strength, others waiting for missteps. The griots sing Musa's name with reverence, and Magan listens uneasily, knowing every comparison weighs against him. One quirky tidbit. Some chroniclers note that during Magan's rule, court entertainments became more extravagant, with musicians playing late into the night. Perhaps it was his way of softening the edges of grief, or perhaps a bid to dazzle where he could not command. You imagine a young ruler smiling too brightly, clapping too eagerly at songs, while elders shake their heads quietly. Beyond the palace, the empire hums, but you notice subtle shifts. Tribute arrives late from some provinces, governors argue more fiercely, and desert raiders test the borders. The markets of Timbuktu still bustle, the libraries still glow with lamplight, but whispers of instability float like smoke. Historians still argue how quickly Mali's decline began after Musa's death. Was it immediate, or a slow unraveling over generations? Either way, the loss of his steady hand left cracks in the empire's walls. You pass through Timbuktu and Gao, where Musa's buildings still stand tall, their mud walls glistening after fresh repairs. Scholars still copy manuscripts, children still chant lessons, and merchants still haggle over salt and kola nuts. Musa's legacy lingers palpably in stone, parchment, and memory. Yet you can sense the difference. Where once his calm presence reassured everyone, now uncertainty hovers like a shadow. At night, the griots gather by firelight. Their songs are bittersweet, praising the Golden King who once walked among them, recounting his pilgrimage and generosity, but also hinting at unease. They sing of how wealth can dazzle but not defend, of how even rivers dry in seasons of drought. Their voices echo into the dark, carrying both pride and warning. Magan listens, shifting uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing the lesson aimed at him. He tries to speak with authority, but his words lack the weight of his father's pauses. You can almost see Musa's shadow lingering in every hall, every courtyard, every whispered debate. The empire has not collapsed, not yet. Mali is still mighty, its coffers rich, its scholars renowned. But the rhythm has changed. Without Musa, the beat feels less steady, more fragile, like a drumskin stretched too thin. And you, standing in the palace, realize that empires are not only built by armies and gold, but by the steady character of rulers who hold them together. Now, that character has passed into memory, and the successors must carry a burden heavier than gold. the weight of living up to Mansa Musa. The empire lives on, but you drift further forward in time, past the echo of Musa's footsteps, into the Mali of centuries later. The Golden King himself is gone, his successors long buried, yet his legend lingers like the shimmer of dust at sunset. You walk through modern Mali, where city streets buzz with motorcycles and radios, but where, if you listen carefully, you can still hear the whisper of history rustling through the Sahel. The mainstream fact: Mansa Musa's legacy outlasted his empire. Though Mali eventually fragmented and declined, his pilgrimage made him famous worldwide. European cartographers in the 14th century sketched him on maps, seated on a throne, holding a golden orb, a symbol of both wealth and wonder. Today, he is remembered as one of the richest people in history, his name appearing in textbooks, documentaries, and casual lists of world's wealthiest figures. Historians still argue about the exact scale of his fortune. Some say it's impossible to calculate in modern terms, but the consensus is that no ruler has ever matched the combination of his wealth, faith, and cultural impact. You stroll past the great mosques of Timbuktu. Their walls, though weathered, still rise proudly, their wooden beams jutting outward like ribs of memory. Children run across the courtyards, their laughter blending with the calls of muezzins, the same sounds Musa once heard centuries ago. In libraries, carefully preserved manuscripts sit quietly, their pages crumbling but still legible, filled with the thoughts of scholars he once patronized. These books are his true gold, ink that survived when coins scattered. One quirky tidbit: in recent years, Timbuktu's families have hidden ancient manuscripts in trunks, attics, and even under beds to protect them from war and theft. Imagine sliding a pile of dusty scrolls under your mattress, like someone hiding candy, except this candy is centuries-old astronomy notes. Musa would probably smile knowingly, his gifts still guarded as treasures, even in secret. Walk into a modern Malian classroom, and you'll see his name painted on posters, his story told to children with pride. The richest man in history, their teachers say, but also a man of prayer who built mosques and libraries. The children sit wide-eyed, some doodling golden crowns in the corners of their notebooks, others dreaming of building something lasting as he once did. Historians still argue whether Musa's true achievement was his wealth, his pilgrimage, or his role as patron of learning. You suspect the answer is not one, but all three woven together: faith, gold, and knowledge, braided like the ropes of a camel's harness. He showed that riches could build more than palaces. They could build culture, faith, and legacy. As you stand in the Sahel breeze, modern Mali hums around you. Radios play music, markets buzz with bargaining, and the Niger still slides calmly through the land. Life is noisy, imperfect, sometimes fragile, and yet Musa's presence endures, not as a shadow, but as a spark, a reminder of what was once possible here. You close your eyes, and for a moment the centuries fold. You hear the tramp of caravans, the chants of pilgrims, the scratch of scribes, the giggles of Musa's children, the hush of prayers whispered at dawn. Then it all drifts away, leaving only the quiet hum of the fan in your room, the soft blanket against your skin, and the knowledge that you have walked through the life of the richest man who ever lived. Wind down, 300 words. And now let the story soften, as all stories must. The bustle of markets fades, the clang of gold coins grows distant, and even the chants of pilgrims dissolve into a low, steady murmur. You picture the Niger River flowing endlessly, slow and calm, carrying centuries of memory in its waters. Its surface ripples in the moonlight, smooth, unhurried, reassuring, just like your own breath. Musa's journey has ended, but its echoes remain, quiet as the pages of a manuscript turning in some forgotten library. You can imagine the scent of parchment, the hush of a scribe's pen, the glow of a single oil lamp in the dark. All of it slows your heartbeat, steadying it, like a lullaby sung without words. You might see in your mind's eye the wide expanse of desert at night, stars shining so brightly they seem to lean close, keeping watch. The sand is cool, the air gentle. The caravan fires long extinguished. Only the hush of the wind remains, carrying with it a whisper of prayers long since spoken. Feel the weight of the day slip from your shoulders. Picture yourself lying beneath the shade of an acacia, safe and still, the warmth of the earth grounding you. You are in no hurry, neither was Musa in his final days. Empires may rise and fall, but peace is timeless, and it belongs to you now. So breathe slowly, deeply, letting the story fade into silence. Let your mind drift like a caravan returning home, like gold dust sifting softly through open fingers. The world is quiet. You are safe. And sleep, at last, welcomes you like a gentle king on his throne of clouds.